So welcome everyone. We're reading today, we're learning parashat Chayey Sarah, which is the fifth Torah portion of the year. Genesis, we'll get to it in a second. I'd rather have a little discussion first, if that's okay, please. Bereshit, the opening parsha of the Torah, creation, the genesis of humankind, beginnings and their discontents, Adam and Eve, and then Cain and Abel, the moral and spiritual degeneration in the world in the time of Noah, and then the appearance of Abraham, who was the hero of the last two parshas, Lech Lecha, when he takes it upon himself to carve a new path for humanity, monotheism. At the age of 75, he starts his journey with Sarah, Sarai then. Last week, parashat Vayera, we saw how Abraham fights for justice for the innocent, and even in Sodom and Gomorrah. And we have read about the binding of Isaac, one of the foundational narratives of our collective consciousness as a people. And today we continue with parashat Chayey Sarah. Chayey Sarah means the lives of Sarah in the plural. So the first thing we might want to say is Shu'ada. What's this? What does it say, the lives of Sarah? Why not the life of Sarah? Why the plural and not the singular? One answer is that, if you like, in our life, in our individual life, we have a multiplicity of sub-lives. There was the life I had in Israel. There was a life your mother had in Greece. There was the life you had in Morocco. There was the life of our childhood. There was the life of our young adulthood. Every phase of life. There is a life that starts when you have a spouse. There is a life when a person becomes a parent or a grandparent, or so we live a multiplicity of lives, if you like, within one biological lifetime. And secondly, there is, if you like, not only there is the residues, the resonance of our life after we physically leave the world, after we die. We leave an imprint on the environment and on the souls that we affected, for better and worse, God willing, for the better. So that's one way of understanding why the parsha is called the lives of Sarah. Secondly, and now we can jump in, we're on page 100, verse 1, page 100. I think you passed it, yeah. I'll start reading it. Page 100, verse 1, it says as following. Vayiyu Chayey Sarah 100 shana ו20 shana ו7 shanim shnei Chayey Sarah. Translation, my translation. And the life of Sarah was 100 years and 20 years and 7 years. This was the life of Sarah. So I want you to think like Rashi. I want us to try and think like a master Torah commentator. Rashi usually comments upon something that bugs him. Something bothers him in the verse. If you want to understand Rashi, oftentimes, why he's making the commentaries that he does, you want to ask yourself the question, in Hebrew, ma kasheh leRashi? What's bothersome to Rashi in the verse? So you tell me, friends, if something weirds you out, if you pardon the expression, in this verse. And Sarah's life was 100 years and 20 years and 7 years. Sarah lived to be 127. But is there anything that you find awkward or strange in this formulation?
Yes.
He's mentioning 3 lives.
Yeah.
The child, the teenager or adult, young adult, and then a fully grown lady.
Very good. So Mark also gave us Rashi's answer. Very good. So very good. So this is what Rashi says. There is nothing serendipitous, or that just happens by sheer chance in the Torah's formulation of things. The spiritual view, when we engage in Torah, is that every letter and every word carries a message. So the message here is, instead of saying Sarah was 127 years old, she was 100 years and 20 years and 7 years, Rashi says the following beautiful thing. It comes to teach us that Sarah was a person who was not corrupted by life. When she was 7, she was a beautiful and innocent soul, a pure soul. Like I recounted on our Tuesday night class, that my daughter was ecstatic the other day in the evening because it was raining, and she said, we said in class today, Mashiv Ruach Umorida Geshem. We said the prayer for rain, and now Hashem is pouring rain. That's the beauty of childhood, right? So Rashi is saying, so she was beautiful and innocent and pure when she was 7, but when she was 20, and Sarah was a very beautiful woman, she still maintained her innocence and beauty in the sense that she was not a manipulative person. She didn't exploit her charisma, her beauty, to do unethical things or unseemly things. She maintained her integrity and her spiritual and moral compass. And also, when she was 100, she still had an outward outlook. She was still interested in other people. She wasn't embittered. Brings to mind the late Sylvia Capone, who lived to be 95, a survivor and just an exemplary human being. And I remember I went to visit her in the senior home she lived in for a while after she had an accident in the last year of her life. It was in the valley. And, sorry?
The rehab. It was like
the
a
rehab.
Convalescent.
Correct. Thank you. And that summer, I think there was a military campaign in Gaza. There was a war. And she was telling me how she's so distraught thinking about the Israeli youth, the soldiers in Gaza. And you have, she couldn't walk anymore. She couldn't really stand up. She was kind of bedridden, or they would put her on a chair. Not the most pleasant of situations. So that was Sylvia Capone. That was also Sarah, a person who, a benevolent person. She always has her gaze outward, and at every life stage, her integrity was intact. Right? It's a beautiful commentary by Rashi. Vatamat Sarah. Okay, Vatamat Sarah, verse 2. Sarah died beKiryat Arba. Kiryat Arba, hi Hebron, which is Hebron, the city that we still have today in the land of Israel. Be'eretz Canaan, right? The Torah calls Israel the land of Canaan because the Canaanites then inhabited the land. Vayavo Avraham, and Abraham came, lispod leSarah velivkota. Abraham came to eulogize Sarah and to cry for her, which some people find striking, because usually people first cry and then eulogize. So it actually reminds me of an anecdote of a great 20th century rabbi who actually wrote a book about Abraham. A book of his writings about Abraham was published posthumously, and that is Rabbi Soloveitchik. So Rabbi Soloveitchik had one terrible year in his life, in which he lost his wife, his brother, and another relative. I don't remember who was the third. He lost 3 relatives in one year.
It's really tough.
Yeah.
It's killing me.
Yes, and I know that, of course, Raquel, I'm thinking about you, and in this context, and Rabbi Soloveitchik together, and which is good company to keep. And when it was and Rabbi Soloveitchik wrote very beautifully. I must add this segue. Rabbi Soloveitchik was a great analytic mind, the way he knew Talmud, to analyze Talmud, but he also was a great poetic mind. He writes very beautifully sometimes about what it means to enter the home. He's telling how he enters the home, and he has like an instinct to convey to his wife something that happened. And suddenly he is confronted by the silence. So he was that kind of man. He was such a great man that he could give these great abstract analytic expositions, and then he could write from the most personal, intimate, poetic way. So when Rabbi Soloveitchik's wife was brought to rest at the funeral, he was, there's a documentary about him called Lonely Man of Faith, which I highly recommend. Ahlan wa sahlan. Good to see you, Rav. Kindly grab a Torah over there on the shelf. Welcome, sir. Good to see you. Welcome. So Rabbi Soloveitchik, at his wife's funeral, he was crying and crying and crying until it was his time to give the eulogy. And then he just collected himself and gave the eulogy. You know, it's like he completely changed gear. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Can we also say that Abraham weeping, that he really became the full awareness of his wife and what she meant to him in his life, that he realized how much of a part she played and who she was?
Sure. You know, I think that there's a lot to be said about this. It brings to mind what Mikhail Gorbachev, the most influential political leader in the second half of the 20th century, said when his wife passed away. I'm trying to remember what was her name. It started with an S. It'll come to me later, hopefully.
Sarah.
No. But I almost had it. Larissa.
That didn't start with an S.
Right, it still has an S. Larissa. I believe it was Larissa Gorbachev. I'm not 100% sure. But when she died of cancer, he said, "Without her, I am nothing." And there was another great Jewish philosopher, Levinas, Immanuel Levinas. He was one of the leading ethical thinkers of recent times. And whenever he would start to give a lecture or talk, he always wanted to see where his wife is sitting. He had to see like his wife. We have a teaching in Psalm 92, which is a psalm that we read both on Friday night on Shabbat and Shabbat morning. It says that a tzaddik, a righteous person, is like a palm tree, of which we are blessed with many.
Reza.
Okay.
That was her name.
I was close. Thank you, Reza. Thank
How
you.
close were you?
Take off the L and the A, and I'm there.
You forgot the
Larissa.
The idea.
No, I said Larissa, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's Risa, not Larissa.
Reza.
Is an African-American name.
Raisa.
To a Russian.
So it says that a righteous person is like a cedar tree, like a palm tree. Why? For that reason that you alluded to, Mark, which is that you know those really thin and super tall palm trees we have in our neck of the woods? It's almost impossible to measure them. You need like a firefighter kind of ladder to really measure its height. So the teaching is that a cedar tree, a palm tree, only when it falls, you can fully measure its height. So too, when a great person passes away,
cool.
It's only then that you can ascertain that person's stature.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's interesting, when Yoni Netanyahu died, Prime Minister Netanyahu's brother, there was a British playwright who wanted to do a play on his life. And then he changed his mind. So Netanyahu, who was back then an anonymous, unknown private individual, asked the playwright, "Why don't you want to do it?" He said, "For a great historical personality, you need a longer historical perspective." And lo and behold, 35 years after Netanyahu's brother died, 2 documentaries were made about him. Almost 40 years after his death. Similarly, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, 20 years after his death, 4 biographies came on the 20th Yortzeit, the 20th Anya. So you see that. You need historical perspective. There's a story that somebody once asked, there's different versions to it. One is that somebody asked Mao, the Chinese communist leader, what does he think about the French Revolution? The French Revolution took place in 1789, and Mao lived in the 20th century. So he thought for a second and said, what do I think about the French Revolution? It's too early to tell. But certainly I think that even people that we super cherish and appreciate, when we lose them, oftentimes the void is even greater than we imagined when they were still around. Okay, so now we're going. Okay, let's do the Rashi. That you don't have it, I have it. I'll tell you. Rashi. Judith has it too. Abraham came to eulogize Sarah and to weep from her. Rashi says something amazing. Check this out, friends. The death of Sarah immediately followed the binding of Isaac. For by hearing about the binding of Isaac, that her son was almost slaughtered and was summoned to be slaughtered, that's what she thought, her soul expired and she perished. In other words, when she heard about what happened on Mount Moriah with the binding of Isaac, she felt chest pains and they called 911, and by the time she got to Cedar Sinai, that was it. Not that, God forbid, there's nothing to joke about.
This is immediately after
yes.
the binding of Isaac.
Exactly. So here we have a rabbinic principle at hand called in Hebrew smichut parshiot, which means when parshas are juxtaposed back to back, you can link the events and draw correlations. And this is what Rashi is doing here. Okay? So this is an interesting story, right? By the way, it's going to later on say that Abraham passed away satiated in good age. And do you know how old Abraham was when he died at the end of the parsha? $1.75. $1.75. $1.75. How old was the oldest man in the world who passed away about 3 months ago? Anybody knows? The oldest man.
115?
114. He died a month before he turned 114. And he was a Holocaust survivor. And his name was Israel Crystal. And he was a Polish Jew. And he had a wife and 2 children when the war broke out.
You know what's really amazing about a survivor? I mean, to really think about it, because, you know, my parents went through this. What's amazing beyond anything that we realize on the surface, when you live to 114, being a Holocaust survivor, you have to realize that when they were young, there was no health care, there was no food, there was no clothing, you were suffering, your teeth were rotting, and so to overcome that and live to 114, he could have probably lived to 120 if he had a healthy American childhood. That's a huge thing to overcome and live to 114 because he didn't have that healthy start in life.
And to supplement what you're saying, to complement that, when the war broke out, he was married, he had 2 kids. He lived in a city called Lodz in Poland. And his wife, with his wife and 2 children. And he survived in the ghetto because he knew how to manufacture candies and sweets. So the Germans kept him for their birthdays, parties. Then he was sent to Auschwitz. And he was the sole survivor of his family. His children and spouse did not. He remarried, he moved to Israel. two more children. He remained a practicing Jew all his life. He wore a kippah, he put on tefillin, he kept Shabbat, kept kosher. He had his own candy business in Israel. And when he was 13, let's see, what year was that? This year he would have been 114. 1903, he was born in 1903.
No.
Yes, because he would have been 114 this year.
100 years ago from now, it's got to be
114 years from now.
19. Okay, sorry.
1903.
Yeah. Sorry.
Okay, no problem. So 1903. So he should have had his bar mitzvah in 1916. But his mother died when he was 13, and World War I was in its midst. So he never had a bar mitzvah. So last year, fasten your seatbelts, in Israel, in 2016, he had his bar mitzvah. 100 years late. You can't make this stuff up, right? You can watch it.
100th anniversary.
You can Google in your spare time. Oldest man in the world. Google
the oldest bar mitzvah in the world.
Yeah.
Is that a world record? That's gotta
of course
be
it is.
A world
he
record.
was the oldest man in the world. That was the biggest world record. And how beautiful it
Years
is.
to become a man?
That
No wonder he lived so long. He was just a child.
so.
Postponing
All right. So. So if you Google, oldest man in the world celebrates bar mitzvah, you'll read about it, and you'll see his beautiful picture. He's sitting, and there is a talit, and all his descendants are with him, his great grandchildren, and he says, "Look how many descendants came from one person," meaning himself.
Which is a heartbreaker, because if you think of the 6
That's
million,
exactly what he said.
how many there
Think
could
about
be.
the 6 million we lost. And, I read Rabbi Sachs's commentary on the Parsha, and this is what Rabbi Sachs wrote, is that he also died satiated. Like Abraham, this man who was 175, right? And Sarah dies here at 127, and this man was 114. Now, Sarah also had her fair share of grief, right? First, she had her problems with Hagar and Ishmael. For many years, she could not conceive. She never got to see her son marrying. She died, according to Rashi, of a heart attack because of the binding of Yitzchak. They didn't have it so easy, but they still died satiated in good age because of how they chose to live. It's a very, I think, deep teaching. Now, where the camera shifts to something very interesting, Abraham is going to look for a plot of land to bury Sarah. So we're going to get, of course, the spirituality first and foremost, but in addition to that, a glimpse of the ancient Near East bazaar, how they did business in the ancient Near East 3,000 years ago or so. So this is very cool. Verse 3. Vayakom Avraham me'al pnei meto. Abraham arose from his dead. The mourning period was done. Vayedaber el bnei chet lemor. And he talks to the Hittites. The Hittites, verse 3, were the indigenous people of that area in Canaan at that time. And look what Abraham says to them. Ger vetoshav anochi imachem. I'm a stranger and a resident with you, amongst you. Now this statement is what we call in English an oxymoron. Oxymoron is a self-contradicting term. And an idiom, as we know, is like a proverbial expression. So I had a Bible professor in rabbinical school who used to say, "Who are you calling an idiom, you oxymoron?" Now, ger v'toshav anochi imachem, I am a stranger and a resident amongst you. Mekis kispas laba. What's going on here? How can a person be both a stranger and a resident? When I came to this country first, I was a student on an F1 visa. I was a non-resident alien, like E.T. himself. And then I got my green card after I got married. Then I became a resident. So how can a person be both a stranger and a resident? It's either you have a green card or you don't have a green card. So what Abraham is saying here, explains Rabbi Soloveitchik ingeniously, is that he's making a very profound statement about the Jewish condition. Abraham is telling us that to be a Jew outside Israel, in an overwhelmingly non-Jewish environment demographically, is to be an insider-outsider. As American Jews, we are proud to be loving, contributing citizens of this country. At the same time, we are steadfast in our adherence to our unique, distinguished tradition. We are Americans, full-fledged, loyal, loving, contributing, and at the same time, we are also spiritually distinct. We have our spiritual religious path, which is distinct from our other fellow Americans. So when Abraham's saying, "I'm a stranger and resident amongst you," he's giving a statement about the Jewish condition for thousands of years to come.
But there was
Yes,
no
sir.
Israel at that time, was there?
Well, there was no Israel as a political reality, but there was monotheism, and Abraham and Sarah pioneered monotheism.
Right, but we at that time when this happened, we still haven't entered the land of Israel. Is that correct?
So perhaps it's not a physical insider-outsider. It's a spiritual
There was
insider-outsider.
not even a promise
No.
at that time.
But this is not about land.
There was a promise.
Moses is much later.
Yeah, but Hashem promised Abraham that he will inherit the land eventually.
Mm-hmm.
But in his time, Abraham was a lonely man of faith.
Mm-hmm.
Abraham, the Hebrew, ha-Ivri. Ivri means like from one end of a riverbank. He was on one end, the whole world was on the other hand. The whole world was into fake news, fake spiritual news. So Abraham did have followers. The Torah says, and Rashi says, that Abraham and Sarah molded souls and they converted people to a certain version of monotheism. But still, they were a very marginal minority. Okay?
To give a logistical sense of, he had immense wealth, huge flocks of animals.
Yeah.
And so, was he sort of in a part of the territory where nobody else lived, and he just sort of, that's where his home was?
He was a nomad.
Around,
he was a nomad, if you
he
like.
was a nomad.
He was anachronistically what we call today the Bedouins, the nomadic, wandering Arabs. He would set his tent, and the Torah says he would move here, he would move there. He was a wanderer.
So wherever there was free land,
Modern homeless.
Well, he wasn't homeless. He was super wealthy.
He was really
But
wealthy,
it's a certain Middle Eastern lifestyle where people would, the economy was agrarian. So you would move with your flocks around, right? Okay. So, and it's also a statement about what it means to be human universally, not only Jewish particularly, a stranger and a resident in this world. Shai Agnon, the Israeli novelist who won the Nobel Prize, has a collection of stories published in English, in Hebrew, as Oreach Notel Alun, a guest who stays overnight. So we are all guests who are here staying overnight. We're here, we read on Shabbat in Tehillim that from Hashem's perspective, Ki elef shanim be'enecha keyom etmol. From the eternal perspective, 1,000 years ago is but yesterday. And then it says, our life, Yemei chayenu im 70 shana or 80 shana, a handful of decades, 7, 8, 10, 12, God willing. Vegaz chish v'naufa. And then we evaporate like gas, and we leave the world. Physically, we leave the world. So he's saying something about what it means to be human. We're strangers. We're passing through here in this world, but we also reside here, and we build our families, and we build our communities, and we work, and we try to develop ourselves. It's that duality, twofold nature of the human condition. We are temporary, but we also reside here.
Why do other races, called Hindus,
religions,
Buddhism, why they don't feel that way? I need to go to, hypothetically, I don't know the birth of Hindus, I imagine India.
They do travel there.
But I don't think that any other race feels that sense of I'm a stranger, I'm a visitor, and whether it's America, wherever they are outside of their domain.
There are many angles to this. One is that we are very tiny people. We're 13 million, which is smaller than the statistical margin of error in a Chinese census. And we are survivors of genocide only 7 decades ago. So we have, and there is still, the world is still rampant with anti-Semitism, whether it's much of the Islamic world surrounding Israel not recognizing it, whether it's the way the Jews of Europe live in fear. So we have a lot of solidarity for one another,
Well, I think another
for
thing
political
is that
and historical reasons and demographic reasons. Yes,
we didn't willingly leave. We've been thrown out of places.
Sure.
And I think that's part of it.
Exactly. So our
The temple was destroyed. We had to disperse.
So we are nomadic people. So when Abram is a nomad, to connect your statement to the parsha, he's also kind of sending a message. We are going to be a nomadic people. We're going to be the world's first global people. We're called in Hebrew an Am Olam. Am is people. Olam means two things in Hebrew. Olam means world, the physical world, but Olam also means eternity in Torah Hebrew. So we are both a worldly people and an eternal people, right? On the one hand, we always sit in the central urban strongholds of scientific, financial, and artistic lives, New York, Los Angeles, right? And on the other hand, our ultimate home is the Torah. It's a spiritual home, right? So...
Did you say the stranger in a strange land, or that strange land doesn't apply? You know, the stranger in a strange land. That's a...
Well, in a sense, because when Abraham moved into Canaan, Israel, for him at the beginning, it was a strange land. I can't resist to reiterate the anecdote of the Chafetz Chaim, who was one of the greatest rabbis in pre-Holocaust Europe in Poland. By the way, when Shimon Peres was a young boy, he was very pious. Shimon Peres. He once came home from shul and his parents were listening to the radio, so he smashed the radio into the wall. And Shimon Peres, when he was a child, he got to see the Chafetz Chaim, that legendary rabbi. Now, there's a story that once a group of rich, wealthy American Jews came to the town, Rodin, I think, in Poland, where the Chafetz Chaim lived. He wrote many books about staying away from Lashon Hara, one of the hardest mitzvot. By the way, if you ever go on a serious Lashon Hara diet, you'll realize you have very little to talk to with people. If you don't talk about other people at all, there is not much to talk about sometimes.
There are a lot of people that don't.
Then you can study Torah.
No, I don't do that. There's some people that just look at me and they don't have anything to say or they don't call me up with the stuff that I know is going on because they know I'm not going to want to talk about it.
Good for you. Good. God bless you. So these American Jews, they were going to. These American Jews were going to make a very substantial donation to the community, but they asked to meet with the legendary Chafetz Chaim. He was a living legend, so they agreed and they came to his home, and they saw it was basically a one-bedroom, and there was one table, that was the dining table. It was a table he studied Torah in, a very simple wooden table, bookshelves with some books and a bed, and that's pretty much it. One dresser maybe. And one of them was astounded. One of the Americans said, in fear and trembling, distinguished rabbi, can I please ask you a question? So the Chafetz Chaim said, yes, of course, my son. What do you want to ask? So he said, Rabbi, where is all your stuff? So the Chafetz Chaim looked at him and said, where is all your stuff? So the American says, me? I'm just passing through here. So the Chafetz Chaim looked him deeply in the eyes and said, me too. I'm also just passing through here. Meaning in this world.
That's right. Yeah.
I'm just passing through. Okay? So that's, you take a simple statement by Avraham, like, I am a stranger and resident amongst you, and you realize that he's making an all-sweeping statement about what it means to be a Jew and what it means to be a human being, a mortal. Tnu li achuzat kever. You all give me a burial plot. Our High Honesty is on vacation, and I need a plot. Ve'ekbera meti lefanecha, and I shall bury my dead before me. Now here starts the ancient Near East, Middle Eastern bazaar. Okay? We don't have any Persians students here today. In Farsi, there's a term called taruf. Taruf is like, please, take it, it's yours. It's like, no. Yes, take it. No. Yes, no. Okay, I'll pay you. No, you don't need to pay me. It's worth this, but you don't have to. That's what we're going to do. Okay? It's really cool. Verse 5. Vaya'anu vnei Chet et Avraham lemolo. And then the local Hittites answer Abraham, and they say, verse 6, Shma'enu Adoni. Listen, sir, we admire you. You're a holy man. Nesi Elokim ata betochenu. You are a prince of God in our midst. You're a holy man. Bemivchar kvarenu kvoret metecha. In the selection of our graves, bury your dead. Here is the map of all the plots. Knock yourself out. Choose the one that you find most pleasing. Ish mimenu et kivro lo yichle mimcha. Nobody's going to withhold a plot from you, mikvo meitecha, from burying your deceased. They offer it for free. Verse 7. Vayakom Avraham, and Abraham arose, vayishtachu le'amatz, and he bowed, a cultural bow, like the Japanese bow today of sorts, livnei Chet, to the people of Chet. A little bit like when you come to the sanctuary on Shabbat, if you see somebody across the sanctuary, you do like a little bow of recognition, respect, friendship, that kind of bow. Verse 8, Vayidaber itam le'emor, Abraham responds to the locals, Im yeshet nafshechem likbor et meti, if your soul truly desires to assist me in burying my deceased, milfanai, shma'uni, hear me out, listen to me, ufiguli be'Ephron ben Sochar. I want you to bring this big shot of yours called Ephron. Ephron was a big mover and shaker of the Hittites. Ve'iten li et ma'arat ha'machpelah. I want him to give me the Machpelah cave, asher lo. There is a cave which he owns, asher biktzeu sadeh, at the edge of which there is a field, bechesef maleh. Bechesef maleh means for full price. Itnenali, he will give it to me in full price. Betochachem, he doesn't want discounts. In your midst, la'achuzat kever. So what's going on with Abraham? Abraham was a very wealthy man, and he was a self-made man. Did he forget the first rule of business, that you don't start with offering full price, even if you're ultimately willing to pay full price? And why didn't he take it for free?
Yeah. He wanted to make sure that he had title.
Very good.
No question.
He wanted the deed,
right,
the bond for perpetuity. He didn't want a situation in which after his soul, after he leaves the world, that somebody will tell his son or his grandchildren, this is not yours. My grandfather respected your grandfather, so as a one-time gesture, he said, you can bury your wife here. But it's, you don't own it, it's not yours. He didn't want to do that. Another thing, Ma'aseh avot siman lebanim, that which the patriarchs did thousands of years ago is an omen, a precursor for that which we, their descendants, did thousands of years after that. Okay? So here, between the early 1880s, when Zionism started, Jews going back to Israel to settle it, to build it, actively, politically, until 1947, the UN declaration for two states, a Jewish state alongside an Arab state, Jewish individuals and organizations purchased from Arab landowners 17% of the land of Israel. 17. So when we came back after thousands of years, I remember my late grandfather, Shem rest his soul, he used to say it. We bought bekesef maleh, like Abraham says here, with full money, 17% of the land already, which is almost 1/5 of the land. We bought fair and square. Right? So notice that what Abraham does,
this transpired during biblical times? Is that
no? The 70% is in modern times, in the 60 years of Zionism preceding the creation of Israel.
Gotcha.
So here is another very powerful lesson from this week's Torah portion. What did Hashem promise Abraham? He promised him two things essentially. He promised him the land of Israel, and he promised him descendants. Look what happens. Abraham is very old. He's a widower. He knows that he's also over 100. And his son is unmarried, the son from whom the legacy of monotheism is supposed to continue. And he doesn't own an inch of Israel. What would some people say? The hell with it. I don't want to go to shul. I don't want to pray. I don't want to study Torah. God promised me the land. God promised me the children. No. Abraham makes it happen. Abraham buys a piece of real estate in Israel himself. And at the rest of the parsha, we're going to see Abraham sent his chief butler, his servant. The Midrash says it was Eliezer, to find a suitable match for Yitzchak. He is being proactive. Abraham teaches us what it means to be a spiritual Jew, what it means to be a person of faith. It means you hear God's calling and you endeavor to realize it. Very deep thing, right?
So the cave of Machpelah, is that owned today by the state of Israel?
It's controlled by Israel, but it's a political landmark. I don't want to get into it, but it's in the West Bank.
Political?
It's a city of Hebron, where you have hundreds of dogmatic settlers, and you have a